So this is a veteran story. This is my next vlog. Of course, my name is Keith McNally, and I'm here with Nina. She's a really good friend of mine. And just to kind of give space to what we're about to talk about, we met back in September of 2024. Um, I and some colleagues came down to North Carolina to do an event where I brought the Envision speakers down to some church in Raleigh, and I forget at this point, and it is what it is. But I had seven people on the panel, and everybody on that panel, including myself, being the eighth person, um, had been impacted by suicide in one way, shape, or form. And for me, I made five suicide attempts. But it was from that space, and it was really weird for me because you like literally after you pulled me aside and said you started talking to me. And so at that point we really started developing a friendship. And I really appreciate it. And so to share space with veterans out there who watch and listen to, my vlog, I've struggled with PTSD for probably most of my adult life, all of my adult life since I was discharged from the Marine Corps way back in the day. But I've not really recognized the signs as a disorder or diagnosis. I've struggled with suicide ideation, I've struggled with hallucinations, I struggle with all the pieces. And quite frankly, I've ignored them. Something would happen and it would be like, let's deal with it, put out the fire and move on with life. In the past year specifically, and especially since I was able to put myself out there and host this panel, I've really had to take a closer look at all my junk, all the stuff I've been dealing with, and really try to understand it. And as a friend, you've been kind of helping me along in that healing journey. And so, one, I want to thank you. One. Two, I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation because we want to dive a little bit deeper because you do some really great things with people. You help them heal. And as kind of a benefit, I've been healing too, and it's mostly because of the conversations that we've had. So just to give space, I've monologued enough for those who are watching and listening. Who are you, and what do you do?
Load. Well, first, thank you so much for always being open to conversation, even from the time that I pulled you aside to really just give you such kudos because you did such a great job. That church is Unity of the Triangle
Okay.
in Raleigh. I really want to give because they really created such a great space, and they do. Um, and so I am like you said, I help people heal. So my journey's been through, so I'm a spiritual life coach, a life coach, and energy work has entered my space. So I'm a Reiki practitioner and archangelic light. So that's another form of energy healing. So just like with many people in this space, if you're doing energy work with me, you're going to get sprinkles of life coaching. If you're doing life coaching with me, it's going to be the energy infused. Exactly. So some of our conversations, have gone out there. So I can go in all kinds of directions. Yeah. And I think that's that comfortability. Like because I'm in this space and I'm in this space by, people end up where they are, I believe, because of experience, life experience, not, this wasn't a vocation. This is as a result of a lot of hardship and my own trauma and my own resilience. And so, yeah, so like these challenges we all have some more deep than others.
Mhm.
They're also, ways that our brain protects us. And so that's why it's so hard to shift them and change them. So, in hearing the day that you were, monitoring the panel and how vulnerable everybody was, how vulnerable you were,
Mhm.
um, and just being in a space to receive, is quite an honor. Um, and I am someone that when things get hard for others, especially I will lean in versus like, ooh, that's not something I want to talk about. Let me just tiptoe. I'm like, oh, you have what? And what happens to you? And oh, tell me more. That's like, and so, yeah. So then I get to have amazing conversations that are actually, even if they get uncomfortable, there's a safety there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, that makes it all okay.
Well, if we had met sometime earlier, like a couple of years back, I would have had you on the Question Guy podcast because that's exactly what the podcast was all about, was people's personal transformation stories and how they overcome something. And we're not going to share that in this conversation, but there probably will be a conversation, at some point where you could share that story. But recently in my life, because I'm working through the Veterans Administration. I've applied for disability. Friends, colleagues said, Keith, you've been dealing with a lot of stuff, and it's time that you take ownership of it. So one, I'm in therapy. So really cool for me. So I've been in therapy for maybe 4, 5, 6 months. Um, and so I'm not going to give a shout out to my therapist, but at the very least, it's been very helpful and beneficial. But there came a time rather recently that I felt broken. And actually, I told you I felt broken, which is kind of a step forward for me, one being a Marine, two being a man, and to admit that I'm in this space that's very challenging. I'm not going to cry. It is really it hurt because what was going on was I was confused. I had to literally to give space to the conversation for those who understand and veterans who are listening and watching this particular conversation. My psychiatric evaluation came up. And so all of the trauma from way back in the day as a Marine, including my deployment, resurfaced. And so that just sent me spiraling, racing thoughts, nightmares. It was just a mess, really. And but I was in a space and we as friends created the space where you allowed me kind of share that. You allowed me a safe space to say I was broken. And so one, I appreciate it. Because oftentimes people who are scared to admit it, and especially men. So what allowed, I say I'm part of this healing, I'm on this healing journey. Uh, but I want to help veterans who feel broken but are afraid to say it. So as a friend, how did you create this space for me to feel comfortable with those words? Can you speak
Mm,
to that?
I can. One, just gonna thank you and acknowledge that you stepped into what's was very painful and uncomfortable. And I'm really glad that you also said how that's an uncomfortable space for a lot of people and men in particular. And one thing that has always frustrated me is when they talk about soft skills and hard skills.
Yeah.
And hard skills to me are the technical skills. They're the black and white things that you study hard enough, that information resonates with you, you can learn. Is it hard? Maybe for some, not for others. Those soft skills, I think that needs to be renamed because those are really hard. Is it easier to avoid, to beat the hard skill, to actually own where you are, to say what hurts, open up your heart, and just be so raw that it's terrifying. So I have such a, and when someone is willing to do that, to me, that is like you're like Hercules. It is so strong. And when you see someone who's willing, or just even at a point, when we're going through whatever we're going through, and we can sit there and try to shove it, ignore it. We all do it to the best of our ability.
Mhm.
And this is when the spiritual can come in. You don't stop getting that nudge. And it just, when it's like you think you're going to avoid me, like here I am. And it just starts to magnify because I feel that this is why we're here, is to learn, to grow, to evolve. If everything were easy all the time, that's just not what the human experience is. So recognizing that, and I think I had shared with you like one of my favorite quotes, and I actually heard it in a song first, and I was like, who said that? Is that we're all here just walking each other home. And I was like, that is beautiful. Ram Dass said it. If you don't know him, his teachings are beautiful. But I heard it in a song. It's called Hold On. And the song's like, just like hold on. And then it's about this community, it's about sharing. And I think I'd shared with you before, like, it starts with like your inner community, is finding, even if it's the tiniest little ember within you, whatever it is, to hold, to grab onto, that it can be like who in your life, like do an inventory. And if there really isn't somebody that that you feel like you could start to share just a little bit with, go find them. You can find them because they're out there. There's
Mhm.
lots of people out there, whether that's at, depending on your faith, whether that's in your faith community, whether that's through volunteering. I have done a lot of volunteer work. And so much, if you want to learn about yourself, help others. And there have been times when I've scraped myself together to get to one of my volunteer positions, but I always did something that was very uplifting. Even though it was hard work, or whoever, whatever demographic I was working with, or
Mhm.
people that I was working with, it brought so much to me. And then through that, with other volunteers, we had established such really close relationships. So when I hear, someone who is, especially like our veterans, right? There has been, like, I think more and more people who are paying attention, maybe is the word, and really, and do understand how our service men and women, how much they need us, how much they deserve us. And so, whatever that little, if there's any kind of little spark, and if you pray, if you get quiet, if you go into nature, I'm like, talk to the trees. You go in nature a little bit, uh, just a little, but like, and it doesn't even have to, I mean, you could go just outside, look up, look around. And if there's one bit of you that is like, if there was one person that could just receive me,
Mhm.
even if it's something small, I would give people a chance. And if you don't find them, keep going, because there are people out there um, who would want to be supportive and receive.
No, no, I do. So one of the foundations of the things that I kind of talk about is community. Um, Whether we call them cheerleaders or whatever, vernacular we give that, uh, those people. But you talked about an inner community. That was actually the word that you said.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know or don't understand, or Roy are kind of scratching their head on what that is, because we generally think, well, my community is people around me, people of faith, or your friends or family. Um, Can you give some insight, some clarity as to what an inner community, how you
Yeah.
perceive it, what it is, how you define it?
Yeah, how I define that. That is, so my word for 2025 is co-creation. And so for me, my inner community is is the part of me that is unchangeable. It's the essence of me I've always been. Now I've been doing a lot of work in that space, but like just one of those inherent things that like I'm a good natured person. I'm a kind person. So it starts there. Now, this co creation, I did grow up in a Catholic family. I am not a practicing Catholic, but I was brought up with believing it's something that was out there, and that's, Jesus, God. And it really hasn't been until the last few years with my own health issue that I had in 2022 that my inner world, because I was isolated, um, and through that isolation, because I couldn't work anymore, I lived by myself. And so there was this going inward. And that's where I was talking about, like, sometimes it can be a little bit of a spark, but sometimes you get intuition, a gut knowing. How many times you think of somebody and then the next day they call you or show up. And so all of these are signs. And this is where my spiritual side, my spirituality comes, because my spirituality isn't out there, it's in here. And so whatever my beliefs are, whatever, they all come from within and radiate out. When they're coming from within and radiating out, that attraction of who's around, well, one, I start paying attention. Like I start noticing the signs. And then two, like when we're talking about connecting with others. So if my inner is full of anxiety and doubt and depression and sadness, and if I'm leading with all of that, and that's where I'm at, and those are all very, real, right? We're in those spaces. If that's what's leading the charge, what we see and who we allow in is going to be reflective of that.
Okay.
At the same time, we have within us hope, light, even if it feels like it is so dark, there's still a spark in there. And I know that there's a spark in there because you're breathing. And as long as you're breathing, that's before you go to the big sparks.
Okay.
But as long as you're in this human and you're breathing, the spark is there. Your essence is there. And so that inner community, and what does that look like for me? That is prayer. That's meditation. When I go on my hikes now, I hug trees. And one thing one of my spiritual teachers taught me, because a tree is such a magnificent being, and that here they are rooted,
Hmm.
and they have to deal with whatever elements they're experiencing. They can't avoid, they can't hide, they have to stay rooted regardless of what's happening. And when he said that, I was like, oh, then that's like how we're, the tree of life, how we're to emulate, right? Is regardless of what's happening there, we are rooted. So when we're taught to hug trees, you approach a tree and you also ask the tree, whatever I can give to you, please take. I am here to serve you. And are you okay with me, serving me? So this whole like exchange starting from the inside out. And so like my inner, and then that other part of that inner community, like one thing that occurred for me when I was in my spiritual life coaching certification, and we were being walked through a meditation, and it was to envision our spirit from the inside, like our essence. I'm like, okay. And when I envision it all right here. And my instructor was like, and make it as big as you can. I'm like, big as I can. Like, wait, what is this concept? And she was like, past the walls, past this. And I got like huge, like my inner community, because it's limitless. We limit it. So when you get so big and beyond all of this, I think your chances for a spark increase. And when that little spark is there, zero in on it and go. And it's no accident that you and I have met. Look how many people you have crossed your path since you made the decision to tap in, that you felt a spark within you was there. Doesn't mean it wasn't tattered and like fighting to shine, right? And you went with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our people show up to trust. There's a lot of trust in that.
Because you gave me space to share, um, how I felt and what was going on. And you allowed me to have the conversation and the conversations that I needed to have. You gave space for that, so I appreciate that. Um, I we gotta do this again, please, if that's okay with you,
Sure.
because this vlog is really all about getting the message out to, help veterans, I guess male veterans in particular, but at least veterans recognize that uh, you need to create that space, but more so when you're able to have I always say if before you can have a conversation with somebody else, you have to have a conversation with yourself. And quite literally, I mean that. You have to get the words out of your mouth, no matter how ugly or, burdensome those are. And so when I was able to, before I told anybody else that I felt broken, I said that to myself. And that was a bit freeing. Um, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the trust. Tell a tree, talk to a tree, talk to anyone.
Um,
Or prior. Serious.
I've got to start that because I think one of my goals next year in 2026 is to hike the Appalachian Trail. It's kind of this event to tell veterans out there and anybody who feels broken, especially with PTSD and suicide ideation, that life is as big as you make it, and we need to add value to that. So with that, Nina, thank you, and we'll do this again, okay?
Thank you. So honored. Appreciate you so much.